Thank you to members of the press who have joined us for today's Count Every Hero press call. Please mute yourself if you're on the call and not talking. At the end of our call, there'll be plenty of time for press to ask questions of our panelists. You can either raise your hand if you see that option in your chat, or indicate your name and outlet in the chat, and we'll call on you one by one at the end to ask questions. All right, and with that, let's kick off. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's press call with Count Every Hero, our briefing this afternoon. My name is Ellen Moorhouse. I'm proud to be moderating today's call. For those of you who don't know, Count Every Hero is a cross-partisan initiative committed to ensuring that every service member's ballot is counted before a winner is declared. With lawsuits seeking to stop counting votes and calls to reject legal ballots from military and overseas voters in key swing states, along with some emerging unrest, today's call features a panel of retired military leaders who are all co-chairs of the Count Every Hero initiative, sharing their experience, responses, and expertise. So it's my pleasure to introduce first former United States Marine Corps General and former Commander-in-Chief of the United States Central Command, General Tony Zinni.
Thank you, Ellen. Well, first of all, let me thank members of the media, members of the press that have covered this. We really and truly appreciate your coverage of this very important project that we're involved in. As you, I'm sure, are aware, our military votes through absentee ballot almost entirely. We have nearly 1 million eligible on active duty to vote. From personal experience, I could tell you, having served in over 70 countries in my 40-year career, that this is an important ability for us to maintain. But it is difficult in many ways. As you know, each state has different requirements. The requirement to register, the requirement to ensure we have a ballot, to get it in on time. Our U.S. military services, and we have 4-star admirals and generals from each of those services, have done a great deal of effort to make sure we're there to assist all our members who want to vote and to encourage them to vote in many ways. Right now, obviously, we've had the largest turnout of voters in our history. We're very enthused and encouraged by that. We want the military to match that. Our message here is protect our military veterans and their ability to vote. Make sure it's counted in each state, because it's critically important for them to know that. And to really send a message that let's all stay calm. Let's get through this. Let's show the world that our process works and that we invest a lot in terms of how our voting is done, whether it's at home, whether it's by mail, whether it's our service members doing it through absentee ballots. So this important cause has drawn us together. We are nonpartisan. You will find Republicans, Democrats, independents, all kinds of political shades in this group and in this coalition. And we deliberately wanted to construct it that way, to show that voting is more important to us than taking a particular partisan position and trying to enforce that or encourage that in any given way. The idea is vote. Vote your conscience, exercise the greatest right we have been given by our forefathers. And ever since the Civil War, we've been doing that through absentee ballots, and we want to continue to ensure that we do it, and we do it effectively, and our states and our governors make sure that our veterans' votes count. So thank you very much for that. I'll give it back over to Ellen.
General, thank you so much. It is now my pleasure to introduce Count Every Hero Research Manager Jack Noland, one of the co-authors of our recently released report, Military Voting in All 50 States. Jack, can you give us a lay of the land here? What are we dealing with? What key swing states are you watching? How many ballots are we talking about?
Sure. Thanks so much, Ellen, for having me. So as you all know, of course, we have 5 battlegrounds left. All of those states but Arizona count military ballots that are arriving in the days after Election Day. So they're still coming in now, so long as they're sent before the closed polls. It's tough to say with exact certainty how many of those ballots we're waiting on, but we know, thanks to some great reporting by Tara Kopp, who I see has joined us on the call today. Hi, Tara. That as of yesterday morning, we're looking at around 4,200 votes in North Carolina that were outstanding, more than 10,000 military and overseas votes in Pennsylvania as well. And in Georgia in 2016, service members stationed away from home cast more than 5,000 votes, with the margin between the two leading presidential candidates narrowing in that state we could very well see the ballots that are coming in to this day and tomorrow as decisive in this election as they were in Florida in 2000.
Jack, thanks so much for laying out that detailed information. Now my pleasure to introduce another Count Every Hero co-chair, retired United States Navy Admiral Steve Abbot. Good afternoon, Steve.
Ellen, thanks very much. I also am grateful to be a part of this effort. I think it's tremendously important. I divide what we're trying to do with Count Every Heroes into two parts. And the first part, of course, is we want every serviceman and woman to be given the opportunity to vote and to have their vote counted and properly so in the election. As General Zinni described, it's the right thing to do for these folks that are standing the watch for us around the globe. The second reason, and Jack, I think, touched on why this is true, their votes can count. And many of us lived through the 2000 election where, you know, the election in Florida came down to just several hundred votes. Well, we have obviously 5 states that are going to have very close elections this year. We don't know how close, but with the statistics that Jack gave you, these votes of our military men and women, in fact, could be the deciding votes at the end of the count. So it's tremendously important for us to ensure that that count is done properly, that their votes are included. My message would be that if we're the greatest democracy in the world, we need to demonstrate it by being able to conduct a systematic and peaceful election in this country and be patient for the outcome, to include public officials and the president. And we must at all cost avoid any violence in connection with the election. So again, thanks very much for this opportunity.
Couldn't agree more, Admiral. Thank you so much. Proud to introduce retired United States Army Secretary Louis Caldera.
Thank you very much, Ellen. I'm really proud to be able to add my voice to this effort. Long before I was Army Secretary, I was a cadet at West Point and a young lieutenant, young officer in the Army. And I thought it was my duty to vote, not just my right, but my duty. But I remember that quite often I would get my ballot so late that I knew it was not going to get counted. Yet I would still mark it and I would still mail it in because I wanted to express my voice as a citizen. We've come a long way from that, but it is still the case that service members vote at lower levels than similar demographic groups. We've learned a lot from the course of the research done to support this effort to encourage and make it possible for military service members to vote, including that 18 states require that the ballot be arrived by election day, when there are a couple states like California that allows you 20 days. Washington State allows you 21 days. And I would note that our service members are sometimes deployed, they're at sea, they're on maneuvers. They don't always just have the ability to get the ballot and mail it back. And so we're going to be talking to some of those secretaries of states and states about things that they can do to help enfranchise our military service members. They're willing to sacrifice their lives to protect our rights, and we should uphold their right to vote, their right to equal political dignity, to participate in our democracy, just like every other American.
Absolutely, Secretary. Thank you so much. Introducing retired United States Army General George Casey. Oh, General, you're muted. Go ahead and unclick that.
I do some of my best work on mute.
Me too, sir. Me too.
Yeah. If you haven't figured it out by now, my colleagues and I think it's important that the ballot counting continues until all votes are counted, especially those of our servicemen and women and their families. I'm heartened in that I think every state official that I have heard talking about the counting has mentioned the military votes, even though they all have different dates when the ballots are due. I'd take it one step further, though. I'd ask that when these state election officials certify their results, they include a statement that all of the votes of our service members and their families have been counted. We ask so much of them, they deserve to know that their voices are heard.
General, thank you so much for that. Introducing retired United States Air Force Secretary, Debbie Lee James.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you very much. And like my colleagues, I have been around the block a day or two or a decade or two. So I'm a 38-year national security professional, someone who's dedicated my adult life to the military, though I have always been a civilian in support of our military. And I can also attest to the fact that mail-in voting works for our military. It's essential for our military. At any given time, certainly throughout my 38 years where I have been an observer on the scene, we have hundreds of thousands of military personnel who are either stationed in the United States away from their home where they are registered to vote, or more importantly, they are deployed across the world, many times in combat zones. Mail-in voting is precisely what has allowed their important voices to be heard throughout many elections over the decades. As has already been stated, this is not something new for the military. It may be new for some parts of the country, at least to the degree that mail-in voting has occurred, but my heavens, it's been going on in the military for more than 150 years, and there certainly has never been any allegations of fraud or widespread fraud, but rather what we have had is the fact of enfranchisement for our military personnel. We just need to exercise that important patience and let the states continue to count. I also want to congratulate the governors and the various officials within the 5 battleground states. It really strikes me that they are staying the course, they are sticking to their process and procedures, and it's working. Just show the patience. If you look at the different rules of the states, Jack talked about different deadlines and so on. November 12th is when the final tallies will occur in the final of those battleground states. That's 1 week from today. 1 week of patience is all we need to show to let the process play out. And I just want to say in conclusion that 99% of Americans have never served and do not serve in the armed forces. 1% does serve or has served. So it strikes me that the 99% of us owe it to the 1% of us who have served to let their voices be heard, and do not let these ballots be thrown out.
Secretary, thank you for that. It strikes me that it's our patriotic duty to be patient and trust those local elections officials. Turning now to our last speaker, retired United States Air Force General John Jumper.
Thank you, Ellen. I'd like to start by saying what a pleasure it is for me to join this group of people whom I have known for decades and served with. And we all grew up under the code of the wingman or the battle buddy of the shipmate, taking care of one another. And my experience as a young officer was I was always the voting officer in the squadron. And the voting officer in the squadron, our job was to chase down everybody and make sure, as Secretary Caldera said, that the timelines were adhered to. Everybody got their registration in on time, their ballots in on time. And it was never easy, but because you'd be stationed in one place and deployed to another place, et cetera. But I was always heartened by the fact that everybody was determined to do it. And in my generation is no different than this generation. Our young soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen are out there serving today in harm's way. They're no less determined than we are to make their voice heard by getting their vote counted. And I am very heartened to see state governors and state officials stand tall and say every vote will count. We should not be worried that process is insecure or unsafe in any way. We've seen pictures of people in the counting votes. These are Democrats and Republicans sitting there doing their duty and doing it, I think, safely and in a secure way. We should be proud of that process, and and make sure we all support this notion that every vote does count. I am honored to be a part of this group, and I thank you all for the time that the press has taken to be a part of this and cover this. Ellen, back over to you.
General, thank you so much. So at this time, we'd ask members of the press to indicate their name and outlet in the chat if they'd like to speak. And I see Tara Kopp from McClatchy has raised her hand. Tara, you've been unmuted. Hi, thanks so much for joining us. Tara, are you with us? Tara, we'll give you just a second. I'm going to jump to the second hand raise here. I see Jennifer. Jennifer, are you with us? Oh, Tara's here. Tara, you can drop your question into the chat. I'll read it out loud, whatever works for you, if you're having some technical troubles. So interesting.
I got it, found it.
Hey, welcome.
Oh, how do I live in the 21st century? I just don't know. Anyways,
You've all done it.
Secretary James, I was just saying, good to see you again, even if virtually. And my question for all of you is, there's been so much attention drawn to the military vote this year, this election. And some of the pushback I got from readers is, well, why should their votes count more? And also just a general unfamiliarity with these later deadlines. And I think that's part of that's because there hasn't been this attention paid in the past. So I was wondering if one of you or all of you wanted to talk about why this year. And then secondly, you talk about a peaceful election and allowing all the votes to be counted. And the president has already suggested that he's not willing to consider a peaceful transition of power. I was just wondering, based on your previous military experience, what role does the military have in that peaceful transition of power? Any thoughts that you could share on that would be deeply appreciated.
I'd be happy to start if you like. So first of all, military votes certainly should not count any less than anyone else's vote is. All Americans, all citizens should have the opportunity to participate and express their will. And then it is collectively how we express our preference. And military members deserve the opportunity to express their preferences because it's their country too. And they also have state and local issues where their families reside, where they come from, that they may care about, and they should be able to express their preferences on that. I think we really have to wait until the election is called, if you will, before we see what the response is going to be by President Trump to the final tally. I think we have a very strong tradition in this country where we unite after election, where the person who loses says, well, the American people have spoken, and our job is to unite the country, to wish you well, to help you make a smooth transition, and to move on. That's what I'm hopeful is actually going to occur. And so I don't want to criticize what he might do before anything like that actually has happened.
Yes, and I'd like to add a point. I certainly agree with everything that Secretary Caldera said. I'll just speak personally for myself, Tara. Why this year am I involved with this effort, and why is it top of mind for me this year? Well, frankly, there's never been any other year or any other election where I was worried about it, where I really thought that there was significant opportunities to throw out military ballots and in which they would not count. But I really am focused on it this year because I am very, very much concerned. The president did say some time ago that he was going to be challenging votes that came in after Election Day. And of course, there have been all kinds of discussions about fraud within mail-in ballots. Now, of course, I know this is not true throughout the decades that I have been in support of the military, and the military has had a great deal of experience in this. So I was not inclined to believe that, but given these statements, I guess I became very worried about it. And when you're talking about 5 key states that could be won or lost by one or the other candidate by razor thin margins, every vote needs to count. And just as Secretary Caldera said, the military's votes don't count more than every other civilian's, but they don't count less either. And we just want to make sure that all of these votes are counted. 1 week worth of patience, that's all we need to ensure that that is the case. In terms of peaceful transition, I go with General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He first of all said there's no role for the active duty military in this. Should there be unrest or something like that at the local level? Well, of course, our National Guard, as called out by governors, that tends to be the first line of defense for those sorts of instances. So I also want to urge that everyone remain calm, and we obviously don't want to see violence at any level anywhere. And I also believe when all is said and done, this will be a peaceful transition.
Thank you so much.
If I just might say something from a military perspective on the military role, and I'd underline the word peaceful. There really is no role. I agree with exactly what Debbie just said. We believe in civilian control of the military, and we respect our elected and appointed civilian leaders. I was Army Chief of Staff during the transition between the Bush and Obama administrations. From the military perspective, it was a transition during war, and both presidents and staffs worked very hard to ensure that there was a smooth handoff. I think Steve Hadley, the National Security Advisor, stayed for an extra week just to make sure that things got handed off all right. And then the military, we prepared to bring our civilian leaders when they were appointed up to speed as rapidly as we could. So we spent a lot of time preparing briefing books and things to get them up to speed.
General, thank you for that. Turning now to Jennifer from Air Force Magazine. Jennifer, you should be unmuted.
Wonderful. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, thank you all for taking the time today. So my question is for the entire panel, though it is inspired by Secretary James's comment about the majority owing the minority of people who serve in uniform to take the time to count their votes. So I'm just wondering, in each of your opinions, do you think that efforts to potentially not count the military ballots could have a chilling effect on both military voter participation and military enlistment in general if people feel as though they're forced to choose between their constitutional right to vote and service?
Well, I'll start off by just saying that that's where I think that the news from the states themselves, because the states, as you know, control the voting process in their state. And the news we hear from the state officials loud and clear that every vote will count is very encouraging. And I think that's something we have not heard quite as loud and clear in the past. There has been, in 2016, there was press coverage of making a point that not all the military votes were counted. I think that is been part of the reason we focus on it now. But I'm very satisfied with what I'm seeing out there from the way these things are being handled and the acknowledgement of these absentee ballots and the determination to get them all counted this time.
Yeah,
Jennifer, go ahead, Tony.
I would add one thing. We were talking about service members, but we also include their dependents who are eligible to vote. And so when families are deployed overseas, it's important that the assistance we provide service members is also provided to those members that are eligible and want to vote. So it's just not the service member. It's to make sure their families are included in this process. And you know, I'm the product of a mixed marriage. My father was a Republican, my mother was a Democrat. And so we want everybody that's associated with our service member, family members too, dependents, to make sure they have the availability to register and to vote in their states.
Jennifer, I would just add this in response to your question about whether it would have a chilling effect on recruitment or any other aspect of the military's operation. I think the definitive answer is no, it would not. I think in a sense it would be likely the opposite effect, and it would be that they would be clearly upset And so would the leadership in the Department of Defense. And so would, I think, most American citizens who would see it as the electoral process not operating properly in this great country. Now, we have a complicated process, as both Jack and Secretary Caldera have described, and there are some very reasonable proposals for how we might try to improve it. And perhaps this is an opportunity, if it were to occur, to see what some of those improvements might be. But no, I don't think there would be any significant impact on how our military operates or serves us.
And if I could add maybe one other point, and that is, at least again, in my judgment, we ask a great deal of our military. We ask in an all volunteer force environment for people who have choices to come and sign up with us and to make those sacrifices, to be willing to be separated from their families, to go on deployments, to risk life and limb. And all of this that we ask of them, what is the message that not counting their lawful votes would then send in return? I mean, to me, it is completely offensive and would be a slap in the face to those who have filled out their ballots. They have followed the rules. The ballots have arrived within the framework that the state has laid out, and yet they somehow would not be counted. It's a slap in the face. It's just plain wrong.
I just want to add that if counting is stopped for reasons that seem inexplicable, unreasonable, illegitimate, what they do is they undermine the legitimacy of the process, the confidence that we have, that all Americans should have, that everybody got a chance to express their preference, and their preferences are reflected in the results. And that's why we think every vote must be counted. Some votes might not be counted because they arrived after the deadline. Well, that's okay. That's part of the process. But if they were validly cast, arrived in time, then every vote must be counted.
Thank you so much. I want to offer a small caveat. We're running low on time, but I've got a queue of 3 questions here. I see a 619 phone number on the line. You're next. Dewey from the Houston Chronicle, I see your question in the chat. And then Roxana, I also see your hand raised. So if you're a reporter with a question, please feel free to drop your name and outlet into the chat, and we'll wind down here in a few minutes. To the 619 number, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi.
So my question is, if heaven forbid things don't go according to plan, and if the election is called before all military mail-in ballots have a chance to arrive, what does Count Every Hero plan on doing?
I'd actually like to see if Jack Noland would take a stab at this. Jack, what do you think?
Sure. So quickly on that, we will continue to explore all the options. I will say Count Every Hero is part of the Military Vote Coalition, which is a group of, or coalition of various groups that are focused on the voting rights for our service members overseas and at home. And we'll be working with those groups in that coalition to explore every potential option, including legal action, if those legally cast valid military ballots are in jeopardy of not being counted.
Can I just say something here? I think the election probably is going to be called, if you will, by the media before all the military ballots are even due in.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, the issue is when the states certify those elections, they should state that they've counted all the military ballots. But I don't think there's anything we can do about when the media calls the election.
I see.
Yeah, absolutely calling on candidates and media alike to count every vote. Roxana, are you with us?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this. I actually had a very similar question to the previous reporter. My question was, what action can you take? But in light of you already answering that, my other question is, what are you doing currently, other than sort of relying on the state officials and the fact that they said every vote will be counted? Are you in touch with various districts or various states, how are you keeping track of what's being done, particularly with the military votes?
Jack, I'm actually also going to kick this to you. Can you share a little bit of your insights with us with regards to where we're tracking this information, the local secretaries of state? What does that look like?
Sure. So we saw this effort as being in part sort of rooted in the principle that, as was mentioned before, most Americans don't really understand how the military votes. And so part of our role was to explain that process, provide some of the information so that folks would know in their state when military ballots would be arriving, to prevent any sort of misinformation on that front. We've also launched a significant digital advertising campaign rooted in the principle that our service members serve our country overseas, and so it's up to us to count their ballots. So it's been a two-pronged effort, and we will continue to grow from here based on the situation on the ground.
Quick follow-up, if I may. Are you able to be in touch with, the deployed military and their families? Are you getting a lot of concerns from them? Are you getting any signs that their ballots were not received? Anything like that in particular?
I'll turn this over to any of the top brass.
I haven't heard that we've had any problems. I think if anything, there's been a lot of emphasis on the military absentee ballots, more so, I think it's already been mentioned by others in this election cycle that we've seen. I would add one other thing. We think of ourselves as citizen soldiers, and I want to put the emphasis on citizen. We train our military personnel to be warriors and their profession, but it's also important for them to understand their obligations as citizens and to understand that comes first. And this is an effort and a way for them to recognize their obligations and their rights and to exercise them. And so this is in line with the question about our communication back to the military. It's not just a matter that we're pushing the states to get this right or the military to make sure that they're assisted in their voting, but the individual, soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Coast Guardsman, we want to make sure they understand this is what good citizenship is about.
If I could add, I think because of this initiative, we will now have better insight into how many military members requested ballots, how many received an absentee ballot, how many were returned. And so it will give us the opportunity to say, well, what changes could we make so that of those that received absentee ballots but didn't return them, more of them actually get the opportunity to participate because they indicated they wanted to participate, yet their votes weren't recorded. And I think this is a great initiative because it's going to help us focus election after election on continuing to work to increase the participation of military service members.
Jack, this is John Jumper. Maybe you could tell us what sort of data collection comes after the election.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. We do know that given that this is a state-by-state process, we will get most of our good information, to Secretary Caldera's point, after the election. The U.S. Election Assistance Commission runs a biannual survey of election administrators around the country, which is where we get a lot of these numbers from. And we will be using that going forward once we have good 2020 data to inform how we think about this issue and inform how we think about potential reforms.
Yeah,
Thank you
Roxanne,
very
I'd
much.
just like to underscore that the DoD does have very robust resources for service members, including voting officers, some of whom you've heard today served as voting officers in their time. And for our part, basically trying to share as much as we can about public information with regards to what these deadlines are, which key swing states we're watching, has been really crucial for us. But if I could connect you to a woman named Sarah Strader at the Military Vote Coalition, I'll share her email now in the chat, but she has actually been in much more direct contact with active duty service members if you'd like to follow up on that thread. If there are any more questions on the line, I encourage the reporters to please put your name and outlet in the chat. But short of that, I will ask the panelists one final question. So the president has tweeted to stop the count, saying that any vote that has come in after Election Day will not be counted. I'd like to ask each of you your response to the President and Commander-in-Chief demanding that overseas military voters essentially be disenfranchised. What do you think about that?
Ellen, this is Steve Abbott, and I would say that we need his staff and responsible officials at all levels, including in the Congress, to say to the President, sir, you need to exercise the same patience that the rest of the nation does. It doesn't help this democracy for you to continue to sound this alarm. It's inappropriate. And I don't say that in a partisan way. I say it because it's an attack on our electoral process, and frankly, it's inappropriate.
I would say that, Mr. President, remember your role as Commander-in-Chief. And as a Commander-in-Chief, I think one of the obligations is to protect the rights of your service members that serve under you and respect those rights, and to ensure that their voice is heard and their vote is counted.
I teach election law, and the President's comment notwithstanding, the Constitution provides that states are the ones that run elections according to state law for both state officials and federal officials. And so these questions, these issues really have to be decided under state law. They're not at the purview of what the President might say. So I think it's not helpful, because I think it undermines confidence in the election and in the results of the election. But I don't think that state officials should in any way be cowed by that message. And I know that they are professionals who will continue to work to do what their duty is, which is to count every vote.
And
I would
and
say,
just-
Mr. President, and to you, our Commander-in-Chief, please remember, in the United States of America, we believe in the rule of law. And you are the top officer, ultimately responsible to ensure that we respect the rule of law. Let the laws of the states, let the procedures of the states play out, and show the utmost respect for those in the armed services who serve under you. Make sure that we count their ballots.
General Casey, anyone else?
I mean, I really can't say much more, but that's already been said. But I firmly believe that it is important to the long-term health of our democracy that the counting continues until every vote is counted, especially those of the men and women of our armed forces who do so much for this country. They deserve to have their voices heard.
General, thank you so much for that. And on that note, thank you to the members of the press who took the time to join us today. I know we've run a few minutes over, so thank you so much for your patience. And an extra special thank you to our panelists for taking the time. I'm going to drop our email here into the chat, press@counteveryhero.org, and we'll be providing a recording of this call within the next hour. So thank you so much for joining us. Feel free to follow up if you have any questions, and look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.